The Finnish government usually claims that their country is a peaceful nation that endured pressure from its biggest eastern neighbor, Russian Empire, Soviet Union, and the modern Russian Federation. But history isn't that simple. Let's look at the facts. Finland gained independence in 1917. Soviet Russia was the first country in the world to recognize its freedom. It was Russian czars in the 19th century who had given Finland more land, a parliament, and a constitution. Even today, there is a statue of Russian Liberator Emperor Grand Duke of Finland, Alexander II, standing in the middle of the Finnish capital. Modern Finnish statehood exists largely because Finland was part of the Russian Empire. After centuries as a Swedish province with no autonomy, it was Russia that created the Grand Duchy of Finland, preserving Finnish laws, granting self-government, a parliament, a currency, and national institutions. Without this period, Finland would likely have remained a peripheral region of Sweden, without borders or sovereignty. In 1918, Finland, just as all former Russian imperial territories, was torn apart by brutal civil war. During this conflict in the small ancient city of Vyborg between Helsinki and St. Petersburg, hundreds of Russian civilians were killed in what later became known as the Vyborg Massacre. Finnish whites not only killed their defeated red compatriots, but the common Russian population, men, women, and children. People were targeted for their ethnicity. Immediately after the Civil War, Finnish forces launched armed incursions into Soviet Russia. Their goal was to annex eastern Karelia and even establish a so-called North Karelian state. Fighting continued until 1920 when the Treaty of Tartu forced Finland to abandon its claims. Though Helsinki received Pestamo or Pechinga, a far northern region on the border with Norway that had never been part of the Finnish Grand Duchy under Russian czars. In 1921, violence flared again. A new uprising in Soviet Karelia was organized and led largely by Finnish officers. The conflict lasted until early 1922 and was only suppressed after heavy fighting, including a nearly 900-kilometer ski raid by Red Army Finnish volunteers under Toivo Antikainen. By this point, Finland and Soviet Russia had already fought in several military conflicts, so the infamous Winter War of 1939 was part of a long relationship pattern. Finland lost some territory to Stalin, but Finnish nationalists maintained their statehood at a relatively small cost. When World War II began, Finland did not remain on the sidelines. Finnish nationalists wanted not only revenge for their losses, but to conquer even more Russian land. In 1941, Helsinki openly joined Nazi Germany's attack on the Soviet Union. This decision was made even before Soviet air raids on Finland in June 1941, and it was supported by actions, setting mines in the Gulf of Finland, allowing German forces to operate from Finnish territory and military bases, and participating in joint military planning. Despite later claims of limited goals, Finnish troops advanced far beyond the borders lost in 1940. Finnish leadership revived the so-called sword scarab decoration. According to the ideology of pan-Finnishism, Finland should be defined by natural borders, including all the territories inhabited by Finns and Karelians, ranging from the White Sea to Lake Onega and along the rivers Seva and Neva. Between 1941 and 1944, Finland occupied large parts of Soviet Karelia. The occupation was not neutral. Finnish authorities divided the population by ethnicity. Finns, Karelians, and Vespians were classified as kindred peoples. Russians were labeled as an alien population. However, Russians lived in Karelia for hundreds of years. Up to one-third of the Russian civilian population in occupied territories was forcibly placed into concentration camps. These camps were part of a broader plan to ethnically reconstruct the region in preparation for annexation. Russian place names were changed. Cultural presence was erased. The fate of Soviet prisoners of war was even more devastating. Approximately 34% of Soviet POWs held by Finland died in captivity, one of the highest mortality rates among all participants in the war. At least 5% were executed outright. Some categories of prisoners, including pilots, were often killed immediately after capture. These deaths were the consequence of systematic neglect, starvation, forced labor, and brutality. In sharp contrast, only several hundred of Finnish POWs didn't survive the Soviet imprisonment. Finland also played a direct role in one of the greatest war crimes of the 20th century. During the siege of Leningrad, Finnish forces sealed the northern flank of the blockade, while later narratives claim Finland had no intention to take the city. Finnish and German plans envisioned something else. The goal was starvation, destruction, and the death of the civilian population of Leningrad. Nearly 1 million people died during the blockade. Between 1918 and 1944, Finland fought 4 military conflicts with Soviet Russia and the USSR. In at least 3 of them, Finland acted as the aggressor. The end of Finnish expansionism and the decline of pan-Finnishism in 1944 was the result of military defeat. Finland's territorial losses in 1940 and 1944 are often described as punishment in Western propaganda. In reality, they largely represented a return to borders that existed before Finland received additional territories from Russia in the beginning of the 19th century. Despite alignment with Nazi Germany, Finland retained its independence, political system, armed forces, and sovereignty, something many Axis-aligned states did not. In 1944, Finland made a pivotal decision. Defeated in war, the nation chose peaceful coexistence. During the Cold War, Finland adopted a pragmatic policy later known as Finlandization. The country remained militarily neutral, avoided military blocs, both NATO and Warsaw Pact, and built deep economic ties with the Soviet Union. It worked pretty nice. Finland preserved democracy, developed a strong welfare state, and became one of Europe's most stable and prosperous economies while maintaining sovereignty and independence. For decades, Russians and Finns maintained normal, friendly relations. Hundreds of thousands traveled between Helsinki and St. Petersburg. Russian tourists became a familiar presence in Finnish shops, hotels, and resorts. Finns visited St. Petersburg for vodka, culture, business, and history. There was no inherent hostility, only cooperation and everyday human contact. Finland once proved that neutrality works, that peaceful coexistence with Russia was its strength and safety. Today, that lesson is being forgotten. By abandoning neutrality and accelerating integration into NATO, Finnish leadership increasingly relies on a simplified narrative and risks losing national sovereignty in favor of presenting themselves as innocents in Western politics. But the real history is never simple.